Warning, drive signature unrecognized. We have been tracking this threat for 41 years. This is the price of our preparation.
Here's what happens in today's story. A Varanthi trader named Kestrel Thorn 9 is stuck at HFY Station, a busy trade hub, waiting for a delayed shuttle. She and her Cathal friend Rennick spend the time mocking the ugliest ship on the docking ring, a blocky, patched-together human patrol vessel called the Meridian, crewed by a species that joined the Galactic Conquered only 20 years ago and is still seen as primitive and weak. Then 9 unidentified warships drop out of hyperspace. They're Ashfall raiders, pirates who have come to seize the station and its 60,000 civilians. While everyone else runs for the shelters, the Meridian's crew, Captain Ria Solano, pilot Mira Akefer, tactical officer Okonkwo Bassi, and a human diplomat named ZTH Calloway, who just happened to be passing through, undock and fly straight at the enemy fleet. Outgunned 3-1, shields failing, hull breached, the Meridian holds the line for one reason. Captain Solano sent a single authorization code, and something is already answering the call from the dark edge of the system. What arrives changes everything Kestrel thought she knew about humanity, and by the end, so does the rest of the galaxy. Stick around because I want to hear your theories in the comments as we go. Here's the story, exactly as it happened. They were waiting for a shuttle. The galaxy mocked human warships, then humanity revealed its ultimate. The HFY Station hung in orbit above a slow, orange gas giant, turning like a great metal wheel against a field of stars. It was one of the busiest transit hubs in this part of the galaxy. Ships from 100 worlds came and went every hour, dropping off cargo, picking up travelers, and refueling before their next long jump through the dark. Kestrel Thorn 9 stood near a wide viewing window on the third ring of the station, watching the traffic outside. She was Varanthi, tall and thin, with a shell-like covering over her shoulders and long fingers that clicked softly together when she was thinking. She was a trader by profession, and she had seen more alien ships in her life than most beings would see in 10 lifetimes. She liked to guess what species a ship belonged to just by its shape, long before the markings became clear. The Ilizar ships were easy. They were shaped like slow arrows, smooth and pale, with wide sensor wings that folded out like feathers when they moved through a system. The Cathal ships were boxier but still elegant, painted in deep reds and golds, built for trade and comfort rather than war. Even the smaller, newer species had ships with a certain grace to them, a sense that whoever built them had been building starships for centuries. Then there were the human ships. Kestrel had seen one dock at the station 2 hours ago, and she still could not stop thinking about how strange it looked. It was blocky, gray, almost ugly if she was honest with herself. No sweeping curves, no elegant lines, just flat armor plates bolted together like someone had built it out of shipping containers. It sat in its berth like a tired old cargo hauler, venting steam from somewhere near the back, as if it could barely keep itself together. "That's the human patrol ship," said a voice beside her. She turned. It was Rennick Odai, a young Cathal merchant she had met a few times before on this same route. He was shorter than her, with smooth green scales and quick, clever eyes. He was grinning the way Cathal did when they found something funny. "The Meridian," Rennick said, reading the name stenciled on the hull in blocky human letters. "Humans only joined the Conquered 20 years ago, and this is what they bring to the table. Look at it. It looks like it was built by children playing with scrap metal." Kestrel made a soft clicking sound, which was the Varanthi way of laughing without quite laughing. "I heard their homeworld only had one system of colonies before they got faster-than-light travel from the Conquered scientists. Before that, they were stuck on their own little blue planet for their entire history." "That explains it," Rennick said. "No wonder their ships look primitive. They didn't even design that hull. Half of human technology is just other species' old tech, gifted to them so they wouldn't die out. I heard humans still argue with each other over borders on their own planet, one planet, and they can't even agree on that. They fight a lot, from what I understand." "That's the story anyway," Kestrel said. "Loud, aggressive, always ready for a fight, even against enemies far stronger than them." Aggressive but weak, Rennick said, shaking his head. That is the worst combination. The Varanthi are calm and strong. The Cathal are calm and clever. Humans are neither calm nor strong. They are just loud. A soft chime rang through the station's air, and a calm voice spoke in the common trade language used across 100 species. Attention! Passengers waiting for connecting shuttle serve. Ice to the outer ring terminals. Departure has been delayed by approximately 40 standard minutes due to routine inspection. We apologize for the inconvenience. Kestrel sighed, the sound coming out as a low hum from a vent near her throat. She had been waiting for this shuttle for almost an hour already, hoping to catch a connection to a smaller trading post 3 systems away. Rennick groaned and slumped against the railing beside her. 40 more minutes, he said. Wonderful. I suppose we have time to keep watching your ugly human ship then. It is not my ship, Kestrel said. I have never even spoken to a human. None of us have, not really. Not properly, Rennick said. They keep to themselves mostly except for their diplomats. I heard there are 2 humans on this station right now, actually. A pilot and some kind of official, waiting for the same shuttle as us if the manifest board is right. Kestrel glanced toward the manifest board on the far wall, where names and species scrolled past in glowing letters. She saw it a moment later. 2 names near the bottom of the passenger list for the same delayed shuttle. ZTH Calloway, listed as a diplomatic attaché. Mira Akaffer, listed as shuttle pilot off-duty. There, Kestrel said, nodding toward a bench near the window further down the ring. I think that is them. 2 humans sat on the bench, and Kestrel studied them the way she studied every new species she met, cataloging details out of habit. They were smaller than Varanthi, and their skin came in a range of shades she still found interesting after all these years of alien contact. The male, presumably the diplomat named ZTH, wore a plain dark uniform with a small emblem on the shoulder, a stylized bird in flight over a blue and green globe. The female wore a flight jacket, the kind pilots wore, with patches sewn onto the sleeves. She had her boots up on the bench and her eyes closed, as if the delay did not bother her at all. They look so small, Rennick whispered, though not quite quietly enough. No scales, no plating, nothing. I do not understand how a species like that survives long enough to build starships. Determination, probably, Kestrel said. That is what the reports say. Humans lack natural defenses, so they compensate with tools and stubbornness. Stubbornness will not stop an energy weapon, Rennick said. At that moment, the human diplomat ZTH seemed to notice them watching. He looked over and, to Kestrel's slight surprise, smiled and gave a small wave, the human way of greeting someone across a distance. Kestrel felt a strange flicker of embarrassment at being caught staring and gave an awkward nod back. Rennick, less bothered, simply looked away and pretended to study the manifest board. Friendly at least, Kestrel murmured. Naive, more likely, Rennick said. A diplomat who waves at strangers on a station full of 100 different species he knows nothing about. That is either very brave or very foolish. Kestrel did not answer. She turned her attention back to the window, where more ships continued to move through the traffic lanes outside. Far below on the docking ring, the human ship Meridian sat quietly in its berth, still venting that faint trail of steam, looking small and tired next to a sleek Ilizar cruiser docked 2 berths down. She did not know it yet, but she would remember that ship very clearly, very soon, and for reasons that had nothing to do with how ugly it looked. Kestrel had traded with dozens of species over the years, and in her experience, every species had its own reputation among the others, whether earned or not. The Ilizar were known for patience and long memory, the kind of species that would remember a broken promise for 3 generations. The Cathal were known for sharp trading and sharper humor, always looking for the profitable angle in any situation. The Varanthi, her own people, were known for calm judgment and careful planning, traits Kestrel liked to think she embodied, though her long-standing habit of judging ships by their appearance alone suggested she still had room to grow in that regard. Humans, by comparison, were still something of a mystery to most of the galaxy, even 20 years after their first contact with the Conquered. Kestrel had read the standard briefing documents once, out of simple curiosity, back when humanity had first been admitted as a probationary member species. The reports described a young, technologically limited civilization, discovered only because an Ilizar survey ship had picked up their early radio broadcasts decades earlier and quietly monitored their progress from a respectful distance, waiting to see whether the species would destroy itself before it ever became ready for contact. It had been a close call, according to the reports. Humanity's homeworld had been divided by old rivalries and old wars for most of its recorded history, with different nations competing and sometimes fighting for reasons that seemed, from the outside, difficult for other species to fully understand. When first contact had finally been made, many within the Conquered had expected humanity to be a difficult, quarrelsome new member, prone to exactly the kind of internal conflict that made some species unsuitable for peaceful galactic cooperation. Instead, humanity had surprised almost everyone by uniting quickly under a single planetary government, once faster-than-light technology was shared with them, driven, according to the reports Kestrel remembered reading, by a shared recognition that a fractured, quarreling species had no chance of thriving once the wider galaxy became aware of their existence and their weaknesses. It was, Kestrel thought, a strange kind of wisdom, the sort that only came from staring very closely at the alternative and deciding it was unacceptable. "You are thinking too hard about this," Rennick said, noticing the distant look on her face. "It is just a shuttle delay, Kestrel. We have both dealt with worse." "I was thinking about the humans," Kestrel admitted. "About how strange it must be to spend your entire history alone on one small world, fighting each other over borders and resources, and then suddenly discover you are not alone in the universe after all, and that everyone else already has centuries or millennia of a head start." "A humbling experience, I imagine," Rennick said. "Perhaps that explains the ugly ships. When you join a conversation already centuries old, you build what you can with what you have, and hope nobody laughs too loudly." "Someone is always laughing," Kestrel said quietly, glancing back toward the docking ring window, where the small gray shape of the Meridian still sat in its berth. "It seems unkind when I think about it that way." Rennick shrugged, the gesture somehow managing to look apologetic despite his earlier mockery. "I did not mean unkindness, only observation. Every species finds something to mock about every other species. It is simply how strangers become familiar with one another. A little mockery, a little curiosity, and eventually understanding." Kestrel was not entirely certain she agreed, but she let the matter rest, turning her attention instead back toward the crowded concourse, where dozens of other travelers from a dozen other worlds continued to wait, unaware and unbothered, for a shuttle that had not yet arrived, and entirely unaware of what was about to fall out of the dark sky above them. The station's security office sat on the lower ring, closer to the docking bays, staffed mostly by a rotating crew of Ilizar officers who handled most of HFY Station's day-to-day problems. It was usually quiet work, smugglers trying to sneak contraband through customs, drunk crew members getting into fights in the lower bars, occasional mechanical failures that needed an engineering team. Today it was not quiet. Officer de Renholt, an Ilizar with pale feathers and sharp, watchful eyes, sat at her console and frowned at the readings coming in from the station's long-range sensors. A ship had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system almost 20 minutes ago, far outside the normal approach lanes, and it had not sent any identification signal. She tapped the console, running the signature through the station's database. No match, no registered flight plan, no response to hails. "That is strange," she muttered to herself. Her supervisor, a heavy-set Ilizar named Talvash Greywing, leaned over her shoulder to look at the screen. "Unregistered contact, no beacon," he said. "Probably just some independent freighter too cheap to pay for a proper transponder license. Happens more than you would think." "Maybe," Desas said, but something about the sensor return bothered her. The ship's mass reading was large, larger than most freighters, and its engine signature did not match any civilian design in the database. She flagged it and kept watching. 10 minutes later, a second unidentified contact appeared, then a third. Then, within another 5 minutes, 6 more, all converging from the same direction, all moving in a loose formation that no honest merchant convoy would ever use. Desaf felt her feathers rise slightly along the back of her neck, an instinctive Ilizar reaction to danger. "Talvesh," she said, her voice tight, "you need to see this." He looked and his relaxed posture vanished immediately. 9 contacts moving in formation. That is not a convoy, that is a fleet. Should I sound the alert? Not yet. Get me a clearer read on those engine signatures first. I want to know who we are dealing with before we panic 60,000 civilians on this station. Desaz's fingers moved quickly across her console, pulling data from every sensor array the station had. It took almost 3 minutes, an agonizingly long time when 9 unidentified ships were closing on your position. Finally, the analysis came back, and when she read it, her stomach dropped. "Talvesh, these engine signatures match a partial profile in the old Conquered Threat database. Ashfall configuration, Raider pattern hulls, modified for speed and firepower rather than cargo capacity." Talvesh went very still. "Ashfall Raiders here at Kepth." "It gets worse," Desas said, scanning further down the readout. "Weapons are hot. All 9 ships have their forward batteries charged and ready. They are not here to trade, Talvesh. They are here to take the station." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The Ashfall Raiders were not a myth, not some old story told to frighten young cadets. They were a real and violent group, remnants of a fallen empire that had turned to piracy generations ago, striking isolated stations and lightly defended systems across a wide stretch of unclaimed space. They rarely announced themselves before an attack. They did not need to. Their reputation for burning entire stations to the ground when resistance was offered had already spread far and wide, usually enough to make most victims surrender quickly without a fight. "Sound the alert," Talvesh said, his voice suddenly hard and fast. "Full lockdown. Get every civilian ship in the docking ring moving now and get me the station commander on the line." Desaz's hand slammed down on the alarm control, and a moment later a deep, pulsing alarm began to sound through every deck of Kepth Way Station, accompanied by flashing red lights along every corridor and a calm mechanical voice repeating the same message over and over in a dozen languages. "Attention! This is not a drill. Unidentified hostile vessels approaching the station. All personnel proceed immediately to designated shelter zones. This is not a drill." Up on the third ring, Kestrel Thorn 9 felt the deck tremble slightly beneath her feet as the alarm began to blare, red emergency lights washing over the crowded concourse. For a moment, nobody moved, caught in that strange frozen instant between hearing danger and believing it. Then the calm mechanical voice repeated its warning, and the concourse erupted into chaos. Beings of a dozen species surged toward the shelter markers along the walls, some shouting, some simply running, luggage and cargo crates abandoned on the floor as people scrambled for safety. Renick grabbed Kestrel's arm. "What is happening? What is that alarm?" "I do not know," Kestrel said, though a cold, sinking feeling was already spreading through her chest. She had heard station alarms before, small ones for fires or minor decompressions. This one was different. This was the hostile contact alarm, the one used only for something truly dangerous. Through the viewing window, out in the black, the traffic pattern outside the station had changed completely. Civilian ships that had been calmly waiting in queue for departure clearance were now scattering in every direction. engines flaring bright as pilots pushed for maximum acceleration, desperate to put distance between themselves and something Kestrel could not yet see. Then she saw it. 9 dark shapes emerged from the shadow of the gas giant's outer ring, moving fast, their hulls jagged and scarred, painted in dull black and streaked with rust-orange markings that looked disturbingly like old bloodstains. They were unmistakably warships, built for one purpose only, and they were not slowing down. "Ancestors preserve us," Rennick whispered, his earlier confidence completely gone, his voice suddenly small. "Those are raider ships." Down on the bench where the 2 humans had been sitting, ZTH Calloway was already on his feet, his relaxed posture from moments ago replaced by a sharp, focused alertness that Kestrel found strangely reassuring, even in the middle of her rising panic. Beside him, the pilot Mira Akafer had her boots off the bench and her eyes wide open, staring out the same window at the approaching ships, her jaw tight. "That's a lot of hostiles for a way station this size," Mira said quietly. "Ashfall markings," ZTH said, his voice grim. "I've seen those hull patterns in briefing files before. This isn't a random attack, Mira. This station sits on a major supply route. They're not here for a quick raid. They're here to take it and hold it." Mira's eyes flicked toward the docking ring far below, where even from this distance Kestrel could just make out the small gray shape of the Meridian, still sitting in its berth. "We need to get to the ship," Mira said. ZTH nodded once, already moving. "Let's go." Kestrel watched them push through the panicking crowd, moving with a speed and purpose that surprised her, heading not toward the shelter zones like everyone else, but toward the nearest lift down to the docking ring, toward the very danger everyone else was running from. "Come on," Rennick said, tugging at her arm. "We should get to the shelters. This is not our fight, Kestrel." But Kestrel found herself hesitating, watching the 2 humans disappear into the crowded lift, unable to fully explain, even to herself, why she felt compelled to linger a moment longer instead of following the rest of the crowd toward safety. Around her, the concourse continued to empty out, station staff in bright yellow vests hurrying stragglers toward the marked shelter corridors, their voices calm and practiced despite the obvious tension in their movements. "In a moment," she said, "I want to see." "See what? A battle, Kestrel. That is exactly the kind of thing we should not want to see up close." "Not the battle," Kestrel said, though she was not entirely sure that was true. "I want to understand what I am watching before I decide how frightened to be." Rennick made an exasperated sound somewhere between a groan and a laugh, but he did not leave her side, staying close as the crowd thinned around them and the observation deck slowly emptied of everyone, except a stubborn handful of onlookers, too curious or too stunned to look away from the window. Through the reinforced glass, the traffic pattern outside had grown even more chaotic, ships of every size and shape scattering in every direction as their pilots abandoned the docking queue entirely, some without even bothering to file a proper departure clearance with station control. A dock worker's voice crackled over a nearby speaker, sharp with urgency. "All non-military vessels are ordered to clear the immediate vicinity of the station. Repeat, all non-military vessels, clear the area immediately. Military and defense-registered vessels, report to designated defense stations." Kestrel watched a small transport ship, barely larger than a shuttle itself, peel away from its berth in a hurried, clumsy burst of acceleration, nearly clipping another departing vessel in its panic to escape the area. She thought distantly that in another hour this same scene might be remembered very differently by everyone who lived through it. She did not understand it yet. Nobody on that station did. But in less than an hour, the galaxy's opinion of humanity, and of the small, ugly, unimpressive ship sitting quietly in docking berth 11, was about to change forever. The lift down to the docking ring was packed with panicking bodies, but ZTH Calloway and Mira Akafer pushed through anyway, moving against the tide of civilians rushing toward the shelter zones. ZTH kept one hand on the strap of his bag, the other steadying himself against the wall as the lift shuddered under the weight of too many passengers at once. "Comms are jammed," Mira said, tapping at the small device on her wrist. "Somebody's already running interference. Has to be the raiders." "Figures," ZTH said. "Standard HFY tactic. Cut off communication first, then hit the defenses while everyone is confused and cannot coordinate." The lift doors opened onto the docking ring, and the noise hit them immediately, a chaotic mix of alarms, shouting dock workers, and the roar of engines as ship after ship undocked in a desperate rush to escape. Cargo crates lay abandoned on the deck. A Cathal merchant crew was arguing loudly with a dock official, trying to force their ship out of its berth ahead of the queue. Mira grabbed ZTH's sleeve and pointed. "There, berth 11, they ran. The Meridian sat exactly where they had left it, blocky and gray, still venting that faint trail of steam near the rear stabilizers. Up close, it looked even less impressive than it had from the observation window, its hull scratched and worn from years of use, patched in places with plates that did not quite match the surrounding metal. But the boarding ramp was already lowering as they approached, and a voice called out from the top of it. "Captain wants you both strapped in within 90 seconds, the voice said. It belonged to a young man in a maintenance jumpsuit leaning out of the airlock. "We're prepping for emergency undock." "Copy that," Mira said, already sprinting up the ramp. ZTH followed, glancing back once at the chaos on the docking ring before the airlock sealed behind him with a heavy, reassuring thunk. Inside, the Meridian's corridors were narrow and utilitarian, lit by strips of white light, the walls lined with exposed conduit and pipe that most alien ship designers would have hidden behind smooth paneling. It was not elegant, but everything about it looked solid, built to survive, not to impress. On the bridge, Captain Ria Solano sat in the command chair, her dark hair pulled back tight, her eyes scanning 3 separate displays at once. She was younger than ZTH had expected the first time he'd met her, but nothing about her manner suggested inexperience. She looked like someone who had done this before, many times, and had never once panicked while doing it. "Diplomat and pilot accounted for," Ria said without turning around. "Good timing. Strap in, both of you. This is about to get loud." "Captain, station security is calling for all combat-capable Vess cells to assist in the defense," said the ship's tactical officer, a broad-shouldered man named Okonkwo Bassi, from a console near the front of the bridge. 9 hostile contacts, ashfall configuration, closing fast. Station shields are up, but their weapons batteries are outdated, decades out of certification. They won't hold long against a raider fleet." Ria's jaw tightened. "Options." "We could undock and run," Okonkwo said. "Nobody would blame us. We're 1 ship against 9, and this isn't even our jurisdiction. Or we buy the station time to get its shields reinforced and its civilians into the shelters, and hope reinforcements are already on the way." Mira, strapping into a jump seat near the back of the bridge, spoke up. "Captain, I flew supply runs through this sector 2 years ago. Nearest conquered defense fleet is at least 6 hours out at best speed. We buy time, or nobody's coming to buy it for us." Ria was quiet for a moment, watching the tactical display where 9 red markers were closing steadily on the pale outline of HFY Station. 60,000 civilians lived and worked on that station. Traders, families, workers, children, and people who had nothing to do with whatever grudge the Ashfall Raiders carried against the wider galaxy. "Okonkwo," Ria said finally, "signal the station. Tell them the Meridian is standing by to assist in station defense." "Captain, with respect," Okonkwo said carefully, "we are 1 patrol vessel. Our main batteries are not built for a fleet engagement of this size." "I know what our main batteries are built for, Lieutenant," Ria said, a faint, tired smile crossing her face. "Signal the station and get me a channel to Fleet Command. Priority override. Authorization, Solano 79 Delta." Okonkwo blinked, then quickly turned back to his console, his fingers moving fast. "Aye, Captain, sending now." ZTH, still strapping himself into a seat near the wall, exchanged a glance with Mira. He did not know what authorization code the captain had just used, but he recognized the tone in her voice, the particular calm that came just before someone did something very deliberate and very dangerous. "Captain Solano," ZTH said carefully. "As the diplomatic officer aboard, I should ask for the record exactly what we are about to attempt. If I am going to explain this to conquered officials afterward, I would rather not do it blind." Rhea glanced back at him, a faint, tired smile touching the corner of her mouth. "We are going to hold a defensive position between the station and the raider fleet for as long as our shields allow it. That is the honest answer, Mr. Calloway. Everything else is classified above my pay grade to explain in detail, though I suspect you will understand it well enough once it happens." That is not entirely reassuring. It was not meant to be reassuring. It was meant to be honest. "Priya, bring us about heading 317, best possible speed." "Aye, Captain," Priya said, her hands already moving across the flight console with the ease of long practice. The Meridian's engines thrummed beneath the deck plating, a deep vibration that ZTH felt through the soles of his boots as the ship accelerated away from the station and out toward the approaching raider fleet. Mira leaned toward ZTH, keeping her voice low. "For what it's worth, I've flown with Captain Solano twice before on training exercises. She does not make reckless calls. If she thinks we can hold, we can hold." "I appreciate the confidence," ZTH said, though his eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, where the 9 red markers representing the raider fleet continued their steady approach toward the station's outer ring. "I would appreciate it more if I understood exactly what we were waiting for." "So would I," Mira admitted quietly. On the main display, the raider fleet formation began to shift as the Meridian closed the distance, several of the enemy ships adjusting course slightly, clearly registering the presence of a single Concord-affiliated vessel moving to intercept them. Okonkwo's console chimed with an incoming hail, and he glanced toward the captain. "Captain, we are being hailed. Unencrypted, open channel." "Let's hear it," Rhea said. A harsh, distorted voice crackled through the bridge speakers, deep and guttural, carrying an unmistakable note of amusement. "Small human ship, this is not your fight. Turn back now and we will let you leave. Interfere and you will burn with the rest of this station." Rhea did not hesitate. "This is Captain Rhea Solano of the conquered vessel Meridian. HFY Station and its civilian population are under the protection of the Concord Defense Charter. You are ordered to stand down and withdraw immediately or face lawful defensive action." A burst of harsh, grating laughter answered her over the open channel. Lawful defensive action from one ship. Brave words, small human. We will remember them briefly before we forget yo. You entirely. The channel closed. Rhea's expression did not change, though ZTH noticed her hands tighten almost imperceptibly on the arms of her command chair. "Charming," Okonkwo muttered. "Noted for the record," Rhea said dryly. "Helm, take us in. Weapons free the moment we are in range. Before we get into the fight itself, drop a comment and tell me, if you were Kestrel standing at that window, would you have run for the shelter or stayed to watch? I'll be reading through the comments after this, so let me know. Now back to the battle." Out on the observation deck of the third ring, Kestrel Thorn 9 pressed herself against the reinforced window, watching the battle begin to unfold in the black outside. Most of the crowd around her had already fled toward the shelters, but a stubborn handful of onlookers remained, unable to look away, held in place by the same terrible fascination that Kestrel felt in her own chest. The station's defense platforms opened fire first, a scattered pattern of energy bolts arcing out from turrets mounted along the outer ring, lighting up the dark like angry red fireflies. Kestrel had never seen the station's weapons fired before, Not in the 6 years she had used Kepth as a trading stop, and she was surprised by how weak they looked against the approaching raider fleet. Most of the shots missed entirely, the raider ships weaving and juking with practiced ease, clearly used to facing exactly this kind of resistance. "They are not even slowing down," Rennick said beside her, his voice tight with fear. He had not run for the shelters either, though Kestrel suspected it was less bravery on his part and more simple paralysis. The lead raider ship broke formation first, peeling away from the others and diving toward the station's outer docking ring, weapons blazing. A section of the station's shield flared bright white as it absorbed the impact, the whole structure groaning audibly, a sound Kestrel felt in her bones more than heard with her ears. "The shields will not hold against 9 ships," Kestrel said quietly. "Not for long." Then something new appeared on the battlefield. The gray, blocky shape of the human ship, the Meridian, detached from its berth and moved out into open space, and Kestrel felt a strange mix of hope and disbelief rise in her chest. One ship, one small, ugly patrol vessel, against 9 dedicated warships. It seemed almost foolish, the kind of gesture that looked brave from a distance but would end badly, quickly, and permanently. "What is it doing?" Rennick asked. "That's suicide." The Meridian did not charge directly at the raider fleet. Instead, it moved to place itself between the nearest raider ship and the section of the station where the docking ring's fuel reserves were stored, a position that would do the most damage if hit, and the position the raiders seemed to be targeting specifically. The human ship's weapons, small compared to the raiders' heavy batteries, opened fire, a rapid stream of bright projectile fire that struck the lead raider's shields and made them flicker. "They actually hit it," Kestrel said, surprised despite herself. The raider ship, clearly annoyed by the sudden interference, turned its full attention toward the Meridian, breaking off its run at the station to instead pursue the smaller human vessel. 2 more raider ships peeled away from the main formation to join the attack, apparently deciding that a single defiant patrol ship was worth destroying before continuing their assault on the station itself. 3 against 1, Rennick said. "It will not survive that." Kestrel watched, unable to look away, as the 3 raider ships converged on the Meridian, their weapons fire lighting up the black in bright streaks of red and orange. The human ship banked hard, rolling beneath a spread of incoming fire, and Kestrel found herself surprised again by how well it moved, far more nimble than its blocky, unimpressive shape had suggested. It was not graceful, not in the way the Ilizar ships were graceful, but there was something efficient about the way it moved, every maneuver serving a clear purpose. Still, 3 against 1 was 3 against 1. A hit landed against the Meridian's rear shields, and Kestrel saw the shield flare and buckle under the impact, the ship shuddering visibly even from this great distance. "It is losing," Rennick whispered. On the bridge of the Meridian, alarms blared as the shield status display dropped into the red. Okonkwo's hands moved fast across his console, redirecting power, compensating for the damage. "Rear shields at 40% and falling," he called out. "We cannot hold this position against 3 of them for much longer, Captain." ZTH watched the numbers drop with a growing sense of dread, doing quick mental math on how long 40% might last against the rate of fire the raider ships were putting out. It did not take a tactical officer to see that the answer was not enough. He glanced toward Mira, hoping to find some reassurance in her expression, but she was watching the display with the same tight focus as everyone else on the bridge, offering no comfort beyond her steady presence beside him. "I know," Rhea said, her voice tight but controlled, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Helm, evasive pattern Bravo 3. Keep us between them and the fuel reserves." "Aye, Captain," said the helmsman Priya, her hands moving smoothly over the flight controls. The Meridian rolled hard to starboard, dodging a spread of incoming fire, then dove beneath the second raider ship's approach vector, close enough that ZTH, strapped in near the back of the bridge, felt his stomach lurch with the sudden change in direction. "Captain," Okonkwo said, "Fleet Command is responding to your authorization code. They are asking for confirmation." "Send it," Rhea said immediately. "Full confirmation, authorization Solano 79 Delta, execute." There was a brief pause, and then Okonkwo's console chimed with an incoming transmission. His eyes widened slightly as he read it. Then he looked up at the captain, a strange mixture of relief and grim determination crossing his face. "Confirmed, Captain," he said. "Fleet Command acknowledges. Contingency Ashwood is authorized." ZTH, listening from his jump seat, leaned toward Mira. "What is Contingency Ashwood?" Mira did not answer immediately. She was watching the tactical display, where a small new marker had just appeared at the very edge of sensor range, far beyond where any of the raider ships or the station's own sensors could easily detect it. "I don't know exactly," she admitted quietly. "But I've heard rumors. Every conquered fleet officer has heard the rumors, even if nobody official will confirm them. Something about a program humanity has been running since we joined the Conquered. Something we never talk about with the other species." On the tactical display, the Meridian shuddered again as another hit landed against its weakened shields, the ship rolling hard to avoid a follow-up strike. Rhea's hands gripped the arms of her command chair, her eyes never leaving the display, watching the timer that had just appeared in the corner of her screen, counting down steadily from 4 minutes and 30 seconds. "Hold the line," Rhea said, her voice carrying clearly across the bridge, calm despite the chaos, calm despite the shield levels dropping further into the red with every passing second. "Just a little longer. Everyone hold the line." Outside on the observation deck of HFY Station, Kestrel Thorn 9 watched the small gray ship take another brutal hit, its hull scorched along one side, and she felt certain, absolutely certain, that she was about to watch it die. She had no idea that at that very moment something else was already moving through the dark, far beyond the edge of what any sensor on the station could detect, answering a call that had been sent the instant Captain Rhea Solano spoke a single authorization code. Beside her, Renick had gone very quiet, his earlier confidence and easy mockery completely replaced by wide-eyed, silent tension. He gripped the railing in front of the window with both hands, watching the small gray ship weave between 3 much larger pursuers, absorbing hit after hit while somehow, impossibly, refusing to break apart. "I take back what I said earlier," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the still blaring station alarms, about it looking like it was built by children playing with scrap metal. "You may want to save the apology," Kestrel said quietly, "in case there is no one left to apologize to." Renick did not answer. Around them, the handful of other onlookers who had remained at the window watched in a similar tense silence, some murmuring prayers in their own languages, others simply staring, transfixed, unable to look away from the unfolding battle, even as every instinct told them to seek shelter instead. Kestrel found her own long fingers clicking together rapidly, an anxious habit she rarely indulged in public, but she made no effort to stop herself now. Far below, the human ship rolled hard once more, narrowly avoiding another spread of incoming fire, its damaged hull trailing a thin, glowing stream of venting atmosphere that caught the light of the distant sun in an almost beautiful way, entirely at odds with the danger it represented. Kestrel found herself unexpectedly whispering something that was not quite a prayer and not quite a hope, but somewhere between the two, directed at a ship, and a crew she had mocked from a distance less than 2 hours earlier. The galaxy was about to learn exactly what humanity had been quietly building all this time, out beyond the reach of curious eyes. The Meridian shook again as another blast struck its weakened shields, and this time the lights on the bridge flickered, dimming for a full second before the backup systems kicked in. Somewhere below decks, a damage alarm began to chime, insistent and shrill. "Hull breach, Deck 3, Section C," Okonkwo reported, his voice tight. "Automated bulkhead sealed it off. No casualties, but we cannot take many more hits like that. Shield status, Rhea said. 22% and falling. Rhea's eyes flicked to the timer in the corner of the tactical display. 3 minutes, 10 seconds remaining. It felt like an impossibly long time, given how fast their shields were dropping. Priya, give me everything you've got on evasive maneuvers. Okonkwo, keep pushing power to the shields, even if you have to pull it from life support reserves. We just need to survive the next 3 minutes. Aye, Captain. On the tactical display, the 3 raider ships continued their pursuit, spreading out slightly to catch the Meridian in a crossfire, their weapons' fire lighting up the black around the smaller human vessel in an almost constant barrage. ZTH Calloway gripped the arms of his jump seat, watching the display with a knot of fear tightening in his stomach, though he tried hard not to let it show. Beside him, Mira watched with a different kind of tension, the focused stillness of someone who understood exactly how dangerous their situation was and had chosen to face it anyway. They're good, Mira murmured, almost to herself, watching Priya's hands move across the flight controls. Really good. I've flown with a lot of pilots. I haven't seen evasive work like this outside of a training simulator. As if in answer, the Meridian rolled hard, dipping beneath a spread of incoming fire from the lead raider ship, then cut sharply to port, using the raider's own bulk to briefly block the second ship's line of fire. It was not the kind of flying that looked impressive from a distance. No dramatic loops or flashy spins, just tight, efficient movement, every maneuver calculated to buy a few more seconds of survival. 2 minutes 40, Okonkwo called out. Shields at 16%. ZTH found himself gripping the edge of his seat so tightly his knuckles had gone pale, watching the numbers fall with a helplessness he was not accustomed to feeling. As a diplomat, he was used to being the one who solved problems through careful words and patient negotiation, not through desperate maneuvers on the edge of a knife. There was nothing for him to do here except watch and trust in people he had known for only a few months. Aboard a ship, he had boarded almost by accident on a routine assignment that was never supposed to involve combat of any kind. "You all right?" Mira asked quietly, noticing his tension. "Not particularly," ZTH admitted. "Ask me again in 2 minutes." Mira managed a thin, humorless smile. On the raider flagship, though nobody aboard the Meridian could see it, the pirate commander leading the assault was growing increasingly frustrated. His name, if it mattered to anyone beyond his own crew, was Grath Austin, a broad, scarred creature of a species that had once ruled a small stellar empire before its collapse generations ago left his people scattered and desperate, turning many of them toward piracy simply to survive. He had led raids on dozens of stations across this stretch of space, and none of them had ever put up this kind of resistance from a single small ship. "Why is that thing still flying?" Grath growled, watching his own tactical display. "Concentrate all fire. I want it destroyed now." His weapons officer, a nervous, smaller creature crouched at a nearby console, hesitated. "Commander, our shots keep missing. Its evasive pattern is unusual, nothing like any conquered military doctrine we have data on." "I do not care how it flies," Grath snapped. "Hit it." He turned away from the weapons officer, studying his own tactical display with growing irritation. In 3 decades of raiding, Grath had faced defenders of every kind, overconfident militia captains who panicked at the first sign of real resistance, station commanders who surrendered the moment his fleet dropped out of hyperspace, even the occasional stubborn conquered patrol that put up a token fight before fleeing to save itself. He had never faced a single ship that refused to do either. "Commander," said a second officer, a wiry creature monitoring long-range sensors near the rear of the bridge. "The human ship's power signature is unusual. It keeps redistributing energy between systems in patterns that do not match standard conquered doctrine. I believe they are drawing power from non-essential systems to reinforce their shields." Then their life support will fail before their shields do, Grath said. Keep firing. Eventually something will break. But even as he said it, a small, uncomfortable doubt had begun to settle into his mind, one he did not care to examine too closely. The small ship had already survived 3 minutes of concentrated fire from his best pursuit vessels, far longer than any reasonable tact Eichel model would have predicted. Something about that fact nagged at him, though he pushed the feeling aside, unwilling to let doubt slow his pursuit now, so close to finally silencing the irritating vessel once and for all. Back on the Meridian's bridge, the shield readout dropped below 10%, and a new alarm joined the chorus already filling the bridge with noise. Rhea's face remained calm, but ZTH could see the tightness around her eyes, the barely restrained tension in how she held herself. "Shield's critical," Okonkwo said. "One more solid hit and we lose them entirely." "Distance to reinforcement arrival?" Rhea asked. 1 minute 50 seconds, Captain, assuming they maintain current speed. "We do not have 1 minute 50 at this shield level." Rhea's mind worked fast, running through options, most of them bad. She could break off and run, saving her ship and her crew, but that would leave the raiders free to resume their assault on the station, and the station's own defenses would not hold much longer either. She could try to close the distance and ram one of the raider ships, a desperate last resort that might take one enemy vessel out of the fight but would almost certainly destroy the Meridian in the process. Or she could do something the raiders would never expect, something that went against every instinct that told a smaller, weaker ship to keep running from a larger, stronger enemy. "Priya," Rhea said. "New heading, take us directly toward the lead raider ship, closest possible approach." Priya's hands froze for half a second over the controls, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before her training took over. "Aye, Captain, closing the distance." "Captain," Okonkwo said, alarm clear in his voice, "at that range, their weapons will have a much easier time tracking us. Our shields will not survive contact." "I am not planning to take contact," Rhea said. "Just to get close enough that their own point defense systems have trouble distinguishing our hull signature from their own ship's mass in the sensor return. It will buy us a few extra seconds while their targeting computers recalibrate. It is not much, but it might be enough." ZTH, watching from his jump seat, found himself holding his breath as the Meridian surged forward, closing the gap toward the lead raider ship at a speed that felt reckless, almost suicidal. On the tactical display, the distance between the two ships shrank rapidly, and for one terrifying moment it looked as though Rhea's gamble had failed entirely, the lead raider ship's weapons tracking smoothly onto the Meridian's new heading without any hesitation at all. Then, at the very last possible moment, Priya rolled the ship hard, skimming past the raider vessel at a distance so close that ZTH could see through the forward viewport the pitted, scarred surface of the enemy hull rushing past in a blur. A spread of weapons fire from the raider ship's secondary batteries sailed harmlessly past where the Meridian had been half a second earlier, striking empty space instead. "Contact confusion achieved," Okonkwo said, a note of disbelief in his own voice. "Their point defense systems dropped tracking for almost 2 full seconds." "Use them," Rhea said immediately. "Priya, get us clear. Evasive pattern Delta now." The Meridian rolled away from the lead raider ship, putting distance between itself and all 3 pursuers, buying precious seconds while the raider fleet's targeting system struggled to reacquire a clean lock. On the tactical display, the countdown timer continued to tick down, now showing just over 1 minute remaining. "Shields at 4%, Okonkwo reported, his voice tense but steady. "We are still in this fight, Captain, but barely." "Understood," Rhea said, her eyes fixed on the display, watching the timer with an intensity that ZTH found almost as frightening as the battle itself. "Everyone hold. We are almost there." Real quick before this wraps up, if you've made it this far, tell me in the comments what you'd have done in Rhea's seat. Run, ram, or hold the line. I read every one of these, so don't be shy. All right, let's finish this. Out on the observation deck of Kepth Way Station, Kestrel Thorn 9 watched the small gray ship execute its daring maneuver with a growing sense of disbelief. She had expected the Meridian to die minutes ago, torn apart by the concentrated fire of 3 raider ships. Instead, it kept flying, kept dodging, kept surviving against odds that should have been overwhelming. "How is it still alive?" Rennick whispered beside her, his earlier mockery of human ships nowhere to be found in his voice now, replaced entirely by a kind of stunned respect he clearly had not expected to feel. "I do not know," Kestrel admitted, "but it is buying the station time." Look, beside them, a young Ilizar technician who had also lingered at the window instead of fleeing to the shelters, spoke up quietly, her voice trembly. "NG slightly. I work in the station's shield control room, 2 decks down. We have been running everything we can into the outer ring, but the emitters were never designed for a sustained assault like this. If that little ship had not drawn 3 of them away, we would already have lost containment on Section 4. "How much time do you need?" Kestrel asked. "I do not know," the technician admitted. "More than we have, probably, but every minute helps." She pointed toward the station's own defense platforms, which had used the reprieve granted by the Meridian's distraction to reinforce the shields along the outer ring, the shimmer of energy across the docking sections growing visibly stronger even as they watched. Somewhere below, station engineering crews were working desperately to route additional power to the beleaguered defense grid, buying every second the human ship's sacrifice offered them. "It cannot last much longer, though," Kestrel said quietly, watching the Meridian take another glancing hit, its hull scorched along one flank, trailing a thin stream of venting atmosphere from somewhere near the rear stabilizers. "Look at it. It is barely holding together." Rennick did not answer. He simply watched, along with everyone else still gathered at the observation window, as the small, ugly, battered human ship continued its desperate dance against 3 much larger and more powerful enemies, refusing, against all apparent reason, to break off and run. "Why do they not retreat?" Rennick finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Any sane commander would have retreated by now. They cannot win this fight." Kestrel thought about the human diplomat she had seen waving from across the observation deck less than an hour ago, before any of this chaos had begun. She thought about the pilot who had sat beside him, calm and relaxed, boots up on the bench as though nothing in the galaxy could trouble her. "Maybe," Kestrel said slowly, "they are not trying to win this fight alone." On the tactical display aboard the Meridian, the countdown timer ticked past the 30-second mark, then 20, then 10. Rhea Solana watched it with an expression that had shifted subtly from grim determination to something that almost looked like relief. "Captain," Okonkwo said, his voice suddenly sharp with surprise, "I am reading new contacts. Multiple new contacts entering the system at the very edge of long-range sensors." "How many?" Rhea asked, though something in her tone suggested she already knew the answer would be good news. Okonkwo stared at his readout for a long moment, running the numbers twice to be certain before he looked up, a slow, fierce grin spreading across his face for the first time since the battle had begun. "All of them, Captain," he said. "It looks like all of them." "Confirm that count," Rhea said sharply, though the fierce grin spreading across her own face suggested she already trusted the number. "Confirmed, Captain," Okonkwo said. "The 4th Expeditionary Flotilla, all 40 vessels exactly as scheduled. Estimated time to engagement range, 90 seconds. ZTH felt something loosen in his chest that he had not even realized was tight, a knot of fear he had been carrying since the first raider ship broke away from its formation to pursue them. Beside him, Mira let out a long, slow breath, some of the tension draining visibly from her shoulders for the first time since the alarm had first sounded across the station. 90 seconds, ZTH repeated. "Captain, forgive me, but our shields are at 4%. Can we survive 90 more seconds? We are about to find out, Rhea said, though her tone had shifted, the grim determination of the last few minutes softening into something closer to controlled anticipation. Priya, keep us moving. Do not let them get a clean shot. Not now. Not when we are this close. Priya's hands moved with fresh urgency across the flight controls, guiding the battered Meridian through one final series of desperate maneuvers, dodging and weaving between the three pursuing raider ships, whose own weapons' fire seemed to grow more frantic and less accurate with every passing second, as though even their attackers could sense that something had fundamentally shifted in the battle's momentum. On the raider flagship, Grath Austin stared at his own sensor readout in mounting disbelief, watching as 40 new contacts resolved with terrible clarity out of the darkness at the edge of the system, moving in a formation too precise, too disciplined, to belong to anything but a serious, well-trained military force. Out in the black, far beyond where the raider fleet's own sensors could yet detect them, a formation of ships had begun to emerge from the dark edges of the system, moving with a speed and precision that no pirate crew, no matter how experienced, had ever encountered before. The galaxy was about to see, for the very first time, exactly what humanity had been. Quietly building all these years, hidden just beyond the edge of curious eyes. Grath felt the shift in the battle before his sensors even confirmed it. It was an instinct built over decades of raiding, a survivor's sense for when the balance of a fight was about to change. He turned toward his tactical console, already dreading what he would see. "Report," he snapped. His weapons officer's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "Commander, we are reading a large number of new contacts entering the system. Human configuration. I am counting. 40 vessels, Commander, possibly more. Sensors are still refining the count." The bridge of Grath's flagship went silent for a moment, the kind of silence that came from disbelief rather than calm. 40 ships. Kepth Way Station was a mid-sized trade hub, valuable but not important enough in Grath's estimation to warrant this kind of overwhelming response. Nothing about his intelligence reports had suggested humanity kept a fleet of this size anywhere near this sector. "That is not possible," Grath said. "Humans do not have 40 combat vessels in this entire region of space. Our intelligence was thorough." "Perhaps our intelligence was wrong, Commander," said a third officer, an older gunner who had served with Grath since the earliest days of his command, when their small raiding band had consisted of only 2 stolen freighters and a handful of desperate crew. "I have raided conquered border systems for 11 years. I have never once seen human forces respond to an attack with anything more than a single patrol ship. Sometimes 2. This is different. This is not a patrol response, Commander. This is a prepared response." Grath's mandibles clicked together in an anxious, unconscious gesture, his own species equivalent of nervous tension. A prepared response means they expected an attack. "Or it means they are always prepared," the older gunner said quietly, "and simply choose not to show it until they must." Grath had no answer for that. He watched the new contacts on his display, 40 precise, disciplined shapes, closing the distance with a speed his own ships, built for hit-and-run raiding rather than sustained fleet engagement, could not hope to match. "Commander, the fleet is broadcasting an identification signal now," the weapons officer said, his voice growing more unsteady with every word. "It says it identifies as the 4th Expeditionary Flotilla, Sol-conquered Navy." Grath stared at the display, watching the new contacts resolve into clearer detail as they closed the distance, and for the first time since he had taken command of his own raiding fleet, he felt something close to genuine fear settle into his chest. The approaching ships did not look like the blocky, unimpressive patrol vessel that had been harassing his forces for the past several minutes. These were larger, sleeker in their own utilitarian way, bristling with weapons emplacements, moving in a tight, disciplined formation that spoke of serious training and serious purpose. "Break off the attack on the station," Grath said quickly. "All ships regroup on my position. Prepare for. He never finished the order. Aboard the Meridian, the bridge crew watched the tactical display with a mixture of relief and fierce pride as the arriving fleet spread out across the battle space, moving to encircle the raider ships with practiced, efficient precision. At the head of the formation flew a much larger vessel, easily 5 times the size of the Meridian, its hull marked with the designation ISV Endeavor. "Fleet Command, this is Meridian Actual," Rhea said into her comm, her voice steady despite the exhaustion clearly written across her face. "Good to see you, Admiral." A new voice came through the comm, warm despite its formality. "Meridian, this is Endeavor Actual. Good work holding the line, Captain Solano. We will take it from here. Fall back and get your ship clear of the engagement zone. You have done enough for one day." "Copy that, Endeavor," Rhea said. "Priya, take us out of the combat zone. Let's give the fleet some room to work." As the Meridian pulled back, its damaged hull venting thin trails of atmosphere into the void, ZTH Calloway watched through the forward viewport as the true scale of the reinforcement fleet became visible. It was not simply 40 ships arriving to overwhelm 9 raider vessels through sheer numbers, though the numbers alone would have been enough. It was the manner in which they moved, coordinated with an almost eerie precision, each ship seeming to know exactly where every other ship was, and exactly what role it needed to play in the unfolding engagement, all without a wasted motion or a moment of confusion. "What are we looking at?" ZTH asked quietly, more to himself than to anyone else on the bridge. Mira, sitting beside him, answered anyway. "Networked combat AI," she said. "I've heard whispers about it in pilot circles, but I never actually saw it in action before. Every ship in that fleet is sharing targeting data, sensor feeds, tactical calculations, all in real time, all instantly. It is not 40 separate ships fighting 9 raiders. It is one combat system split across 40 hulls, fighting 9 raiders who are each fighting completely alone." On the tactical display, the difference became brutally clear within moments. The raider ships, which had fought with brutal effectiveness against the lone Meridian, found themselves utterly overwhelmed the instant the human fleet closed to engagement range. Every maneuver a raider pilot attempted seemed to be anticipated a fraction of a second before it happened. Every gap in the raider formation was exploited instantly by whichever human vessel happened to have the best firing angle. It was not a battle of individual ships against individual ships. It was a battle of one coordinated intelligence against 9 desperate, isolated combatants, each fighting blind compared to their opponents. "Ancestors," Okonkwo murmured, watching the display with something between professional admiration and genuine awe, despite having served aboard a human vessel for years and having some idea of what the fleet was capable of. "I've read the specs. I've run the simulations. I have never actually seen the network run at full engagement capacity before." Out on the observation deck of Kepthway Station, Kestrel Thorn 9 watched the battle's sudden and total reversal with a growing sense of disbelief that bordered on something almost spiritual. Where moments ago she had watched a single small human ship struggle desperately against overwhelming odds, she now watched an entire fleet of human vessels dismantle a feared raider force with a speed and coordination that defied everything she had ever believed about human military capability. "That is not possible," Rennick said, his voice hollow with shock. 40 ships appearing from nowhere moving like that. How did nobody know humanity had this?" "Maybe nobody was supposed to know," Kestrel said slowly, watching as one raider ship after another lost power, its weapons going dark, its shields collapsing under a barrage of precisely coordinated fire. "Maybe that is exactly the point." Around them, other beings who had remained at the observation windows despite the danger began to murmur among themselves, a rising tide of confused and awestruck conversation in a dozen different languages, all expressing some version of the same disbelief. The mocking laughter that had filled this same observation deck barely an hour ago, directed at the blocky, unimpressive shape of the human patrol ship had vanished completely, replaced by something closer to reverent silence. One of the raider ships attempted a desperate breakaway maneuver, diving toward the gas giant's upper atmosphere in a bid to use the planet's turbulent weather patterns as cover from sensor tracking, a tactic that had apparently worked for this same crew on at least one previous occasion. Based on the confident way the pilot executed the maneuver, two human vessels peeled off from the main formation to intercept, closing the gap with a calm, unhurried precision that suggested the maneuver had already been anticipated, perhaps even simulated in advance, long before the raider pilot ever attempted it. "They know our tactics," the older gunner said, watching the intercept unfold on Grath's own display. "Commander, I do not think this is our first appearance in their threat assessments." Grath said nothing, watching in grim silence as his fleeing ship was quickly boxed in, its engines disabled by a precise strike that left the hull otherwise intact, a level of restraint and control that unsettled him more than outright destruction would have. These were not gunners simply trying to kill as many raiders as possible. These were gunners executing a plan methodically, exactly as intended, with almost no wasted shots and no unnecessary damage. One by one, the raider ships either surrendered, their weapons and engines disabled by precise, almost surgical strikes from the human fleet, or attempted to flee back toward the edge of the system, only to find their retreat routes calmly and efficiently cut off by ships that seemed to have anticipated exactly where they would try to run. Grath Austin's own flagship, badly damaged and stripped of most of its weapons capability within the first 2 minutes of the engagement, drifted dead in space, its bridge crew staring in stunned silence at the wreckage of what had, until very recently, been one of the most feared raiding fleets in this stretch of the galaxy. The older gunner moved to comply, then paused, glancing back at his commander with an expression that carried more sympathy than Grath expected from a crew member he had led into so many dangerous engagements over the years. "Commander, for what it is worth, no one could have predicted this. Our intelligence on human capability was consistent with every other raid we have run against conquered border systems for over a decade." "That is little comfort now," Grath said, watching through the forward viewport as one of the human vessels drew closer, its weapons trained but not firing, waiting patiently for his crew's formal surrender. "We believe the stories, the same stories everyone in this sector believed. Weak ships, weak resolve, a young species playing at being part of a galaxy it did not yet understand. We were fools to believe it so completely." "Perhaps," the gunner said. "Or perhaps humanity simply wanted us to believe it, Commander, and made very sure we had every reason to." Grath said nothing further, watching in grim silence as his ruined flagship drifted, powerless, among the wreckage of what had until very recently been the most feared raiding fleet in this stretch of the galaxy. "Signal them," Grath said finally, his voice hollow with defeat. "Tell them we surrender. Tell them whatever they want to hear." Aboard the Endeavor, Admiral Teresa Nemlu watched the final moments of the engagement from her command chair with the calm, practiced patience of someone who had overseen dozens of similar operations, though none perhaps with quite this level of public visibility. The battle had lasted less than 4 minutes from the moment her fleet arrived, a fact that would undoubtedly find its way into military histories and public reports across 100 different worlds within the next several days. "All hostile vessels neutralized, Admiral," reported her tactical officer, a sharp-eyed man named Dario Finn. "2 destroyed outright, 7 disabled and requesting surrender terms. 0 casualties among our own fleet." "Good work, all of you," Teresa said, allowing herself a small, tired smile. "Signal the station. Let them know the threat has been neutralized and that we will be coordinating with their security forces on prisoner transfer and salvage operations." "Aye, Admiral. Casualties among the raider crews?" "Minimal, Admiral. Our strikes targeted engines and weapon systems specifically, per standard engagement protocol. Enemy crews are largely intact and will be processed according to conquered prisoner of war conventions once transferred. Teresa nodded, satisfied. It had been a deliberate part of the doctrine from the very beginning, one she had argued for personally during the program's earliest planning sessions years ago. Precision over annihilation, wherever precision was possible. Destroying an enemy fleet outright was easy, given the network's coordination advantages. Disabling it cleanly, minimizing casualties even among hostile forces, required considerably more discipline and considerably more restraint. It was a harder standard to meet, but Teresa had always believed it mattered, both for the crews who had to live with the memory of the battle afterward, and for the reputation humanity would carry into every future encounter across a galaxy that was, whether it always seemed like it or not, still watching and still judging. Teresa turned her attention to a secondary display, where a live feed from Kepth Way Station's own public sensors showed the aftermath of the brief but decisive engagement, the wreckage of raider ships drifting silently among the calm, orderly formation of her own fleet. She had commanded the 4th Expeditionary Flotilla for almost 6 years now, ever since the program that built it had first moved from theoretical planning into active deployment, and she understood, perhaps better than most, exactly what today's engagement represented. For 20 years, since humanity had first joined the wider galactic community, the other species of the conquered had seen only a small, cautious fraction of what human engineering and human military doctrine were truly capable of producing. They had seen the individual patrol ships, blocky and unglamorous, built for durability and function rather than elegant appearance, and they had drawn their own conclusions about human capability from that limited glimpse. Few outside a small circle of conquered military leadership, and few still outside humanity's own government, understood that those individual ships were never meant to be judged alone. They were nodes, pieces of a larger system, one designed from the very beginning around a philosophy that had guided human military thinking since long before humanity ever left its own solar system. No single unit needed to be the strongest, the fastest, or the most impressive, so long as the network connecting all of them together was faster, smarter, and more coordinated than anything any single opponent could bring to bear. Today, for the first time in a public engagement witnessed by dozens of species across a busy interstellar way station, that network had been allowed to show exactly what it could do. Admiral Dario said, "The station commander is requesting a direct channel. He says half the station is already asking questions about what they just witnessed." Teresa's smile widened slightly, though there was a certain weariness in it too, the tiredness of someone who had known this moment was coming for a long time, and had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that it might have arrived under gentler circumstances. "Open the channel," she said. "It seems the galaxy has some questions for us." In the hours after the battle, Kepth Way Station slowly returned to something resembling normal operation, though nothing about the atmosphere on board felt quite the same as it had before the alarm sounded. Repair crews moved through the outer docking ring, patching damaged sections of hull and restoring power to the sections that had lost it during the brief but intense engagement. Civilians who had huddled in the shelter zones began to emerge, cautious at first, then increasingly curious as word spread of exactly what had happened outside the station's windows while they hid. Kestrel Thorn 9 had not moved from the observation deck the entire time. She stood near the same reinforced window where she had watched the battle unfold, now looking out at a very different scene. The wreckage of 2 destroyed raider ships drifted quietly among the debris field, slowly being gathered by salvage tugs. 7 more raider vessels sat disabled and under guard, their crews already transferred to holding cells aboard the human fleet for eventual processing under conquered law. Spread across the system in a calm, orderly formation, 40 human warships held their positions, an overwhelming and undeniable presence that, less than a day ago, Kestrel would have sworn could not possibly exist. I still cannot believe it, Rennick said beside her, his voice quieter and more thoughtful than she had ever heard it. He had stayed with her the entire time, watching the aftermath unfold in a kind of stunned silence that had only slowly begun to lift. 40 ships, coordinated like that, and we never knew. Nobody knew. Somebody knew, Kestrel said. The conquered military command must have known, at least in outline. This is not the kind of thing you build overnight. Then why keep it secret? Why let the rest of the galaxy think humans were weak for 20 years, if this is what you were truly capable of the entire time? Kestrel considered the question carefully before answering, turning it over in her mind the way she turned over the value of an unfamiliar trade good, trying to understand its true worth before committing to any judgment. Perhaps, she said slowly, because it was safer that way. A species that everyone underestimates has room to grow, to build, to prepare, without inviting the kind of attention or fear that a visibly powerful new arrival to galactic society might attract. The conquered had wars before humanity ever arrived. Old grudges, old rivalries. Perhaps humanity understood that arriving quietly and building carefully was wiser than arriving loudly and being seen as a threat before anyone had a chance to know them as people first. Rennick was silent for a long moment, watching the distant shapes of the human fleet through the window. "That ship," he finally said. "The little gray one, the Meridian, it looks so weak." "I mocked it, Kestrel. I stood right here and mocked it less than 2 hours ago." "So did I," Kestrel admitted, "in my own way. It held off 3 raider ships alone, long enough for that entire fleet to arrive." "It was never weak," Rennick said. "It was exactly strong enough to do exactly what it needed to do, for exactly as long as it needed to do it. And I judged it by how it looked, instead of what it was built to accomplish." Kestrel made her soft clicking sound again, though this time it did not carry the same easy humor it had earlier that day. A lesson worth remembering, perhaps, for both of us. Aboard the Meridian, now docked once more in its berth for emergency repairs, Captain Rhea Solano sat in her quarters, finally allowing herself a moment of stillness after hours of coordinating damage reports, casualty assessments, and communications with both station security and fleet command. She was tired in a way that went beyond simple physical exhaustion, the particular tiredness that came after holding a line she had not been entirely certain would hold. A soft chime at her door announced a visitor, and she called for them to enter. ZTH Calloway stepped inside, looking a little worse for wear himself, though largely unharmed by the battle beyond the general shaking his nerves had taken. "Captain," he said, "I wanted to thank you properly. I mean, not just the formal kind of thanks I will have to write up in my diplomatic report later." Rhea managed a tired smile. "You do not need to thank me, Mr. Calloway. It is the job." "Still," ZTH said, taking a seat across from her when she gestured toward it. "I have been doing diplomatic work with the Concord's member species for almost 8 years now. I have heard what they say about us in private when they think no human is listening closely enough to understand the nuance. Primitive, weak, aggressive, without the strength to back it up. I have heard it so many times that I stopped being bothered by it mostly. It was simply the price of admission to a much larger community, and I understood why our government chose to let that impression stand rather than correct it too aggressively." "And now?" Rhea asked. ZTH was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Now I think that impression is about to change very quickly, whether our government intended it to happen this way or not. Word of what happened here today will spread through conquered space within days. Every species with a stake in galactic politics will be recalculating exactly what humanity means as a member of this community." Rhea's expression grew more serious. "That is what worries me, honestly. Fleet Command kept the expeditionary program quiet for a reason. A species that reveals overwhelming strength too suddenly can trigger exactly the kind of fear and preemptive hostility that our government worked so hard to avoid during our first 2 decades in the Concord. Maybe, ZTH said, or maybe today showed something more important than raw strength. 60,000 civilians on this station, most of them not human, all of them alive right now because a human captain chose to put her ship and her crew between a raider fleet and a station that was not even her jurisdiction to defend. That is not just a demonstration of what humanity can destroy, Captain. It is a demonstration of what humanity chooses to protect and how far we are willing to go to protect it. Rhea considered his words for a long moment, looking out through the small viewport in her quarters at the calm, orderly formation of the 4th Expeditionary Flotilla, still holding its position out among the stars. "I hope you are right," she said finally. "I hope that is the story the galaxy remembers, instead of just the size of the fleet." 3 days later, Admiral Teresa Nemlu stood in a small conference room aboard Kepthway Station, facing an unusually large gathering of representatives from across the Concord's member species. Ilizar diplomats sat beside Cathal trade officials. Varanthi Station administrators sat near representatives from half a dozen other species Teresa recognized from her years of Concord service. All of them gathered for the same reason, to formally discuss and formally understand exactly what had happened at Kepthway Station and what it meant for humanity's place within the wider galactic community going forward. "Admiral Nemlu," began the lead Ilizar representative, an elder statesman named Corvin Ashwing, his feathers carefully groomed despite the gravity of the meeting. "The Concord thanks humanity for its decisive intervention in defense of this station and its civilian population. That gratitude is genuine and will be formally recorded. However, I believe I speak for many gathered here when I say we have questions about the scale of the fleet that responded to this incident." A brief murmur passed through the room before Teresa raised a hand gently, and the assembled representatives quieted once more, waiting for her response. "That is a fair question, Ambassador," Teresa said, standing to address the room directly, "and I intend to answer it honestly, within the limits of what Fleet Command has authorized me to share. Humanity has, since joining the Concord 20 years ago, maintained a defense doctrine built around distributed, networked fleet coordination rather than individually powerful vessels. Our patrol ships are, by design, unremarkable in appearance and modest in individual capability. That was never a limitation forced upon us by circumstance. It was a deliberate choice, made because we believed, and still believe, that a galaxy already scarred by old wars and old rivalries did not need another visibly dominant power to fear." A murmur moved through the assembled representatives. "We chose to grow quietly," Teresa continued, "to build our strength gradually and to demonstrate it only when genuinely necessary, rather than parade it as a warning to species we hoped, and still hope, to call friends and partners rather than rivals. What you witnessed here was not the full extent of our capability. It was one flotilla, responding to one crisis in one sector of space. We do not intend that to be read as a threat. We intend it to be read exactly as it happened. A promise kept, to protect this community and the beings within it, whenever and wherever that protection is genuinely needed." A Cathal trade official near the back of the room raised a hand, waiting for Teresa's nod before speaking. "Admiral, forgive the bluntness of the question, but many of my colleagues in the trade guilds will ask it regardless of whether I do. If humanity has been holding back its true military strength for 20 years, how can this Concord trust that you are not still holding back further capability beyond what we saw here today?" Teresa considered the question honestly before answering. "We are, Ambassador. I will not insult this room by pretending otherwise. Every member species of this Concord holds back some capability from full public disclosure, for reasons of security that I suspect every government in this room understands perfectly well. What I can tell you is this. The doctrine you saw demonstrated here was built, from its very first design principle, around defense and protection rather than conquest or intimidation. We did not build the expeditionary flotilla to expand human territory at the expense of our neighbors. We built it because our own history taught us, at great cost, exactly what happens to a people who wait too long to prepare for danger. Corvin Ashwing was quiet for a long moment, his sharp eyes studying the human admiral carefully. That is a great deal of trust to ask a nervous galaxy to extend, Admiral, on the strength of a single battle. It is, Teresa agreed, which is why humanity does not ask you to extend that trust based on one battle alone. We ask you to judge us the same way you would judge any new member of this community, by our actions over time, consistently applied. Kepth Way Station is not the first time human forces have quietly assisted conquered operations, Ambassador. It is simply the first time we have done so publicly enough that it could not be quietly overlooked. Back on the observation deck, Kestrel Thorn 9 watched the human fleet begin its slow withdrawal from the system, the 40 ships of the 4th Expeditionary Flotilla forming into a graceful, disciplined formation as they prepared for their departure back toward whatever quiet posting had called them here in the first place. Among them, smaller and more battered than the rest, the Meridian held its place in the formation, its damaged hull already partially repaired, ready to continue whatever patrol duties awaited it next. Rennick stood beside her once more, having delayed his own departure by another full day, just to see how the situation would resolve. "Will you look at ships differently now?" he asked. "Human ships, I mean." Kestrel thought about the question seriously before answering. "I think," she said slowly, "I will look at everything differently now. Not just human ships. Every ship, every species, every stranger I meet in a place like this. It is easy to judge something by how it looks on the outside, Rennick. It is much harder and much more valuable to understand what it is truly built to do and why." Far below on the docking ring, the boarding ramp of the Meridian slowly retracted as the ship prepared for departure, its crew going through the familiar motions of undocking procedure, readying themselves for whatever quiet patrol duty would come next, largely unaware, or perhaps simply uninterested, in the fact that they had just changed how an entire galaxy understood their species. The shuttle that Kestrel and Rennick had originally been waiting for so many hours ago finally departed the station later that same day, carrying them both toward their original destinations, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. But as Kestrel settled into her seat and watched Kepth Way Station shrink behind her through the small viewport, she found herself thinking not about her delayed trade schedule, nor about the profits she still hoped to make on this trip, but about a small, blocky, unremarkable gray ship that had stood alone against overwhelming odds simply because it was the right thing to do. Somewhere out in the vast dark of the galaxy, humanity's ships continued their quiet patrols, unremarkable in appearance, easy to mock from a distance, and ready without hesitation to reveal exactly what they were truly capable of, whenever the moment finally demanded it. She thought, too, about the words the human admiral had spoken during the formal Concord meeting, words that had already begun circulating through trade networks and diplomatic channels across a dozen systems by the time Kestrel's shuttle finally departed. A promise kept, rather than a threat made. It was a fine sentiment, the kind diplomats were trained to offer in moments like this. And Kestrel, ever the careful trader, knew better than to accept fine sentiments at face value without evidence to support them. But she had seen the evidence herself, standing at that observation window, watching a small, unremarkable ship place itself between danger and 60,000 strangers who were not its own people, simply because doing so was the right thing to do. That, she thought, was worth more than any formal statement delivered in a conference room days later. "Where will you go next?" Rennick asked, settling into the seat beside her as the shuttle began its final approach toward its first waypoint. "Wherever the trade routes take me," Kestrel said, "same as always." and if you cross paths with more human ships along the way. Kestrel considered the question, watching the stars shift slowly outside the shuttle's small viewport. Then I will look a little closer before I decide what I think of them, she said. I imagine that is a lesson worth carrying for a long while yet. The galaxy, Kestrel suspected, would be a little more careful about its jokes from now on. If this one hit for you, let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.